The movie starts with Rick, who is a suburban father going through a photo album with his 2 children. Rick's wife, Maggie, is busy trying to wrap up with the baby so they can attend a friend's dinner party. Rick and Maggie are trying to revive the spark in their relationship. Parenthood has kept them preoccupied and away from each other. On their way to the party, Rick and Maggie are discussing reviving their date night routine, but Maggie notices him checking out another woman. This annoys her, but meeting her good friend Grace and her husband Fred calms her down. Grace and Fred are also another married couple and friends of Rick and Maggie. They share the same struggles as Rick and Maggie. Fred believes he is discreet with the tactics he uses to check out other women. However, Grace is aware of his antics. It bothers both Grace and Maggie that their husbands blatantly admire other women during the party. Rick convinces Maggie to leave the party early so they can get some bedroom rodeo going. They arrive home, excited to get busy. Their bubble bursts when they're welcomed by their son, who is fighting insomnia. Their babysitter, Paige, is unable to convince the young boy to sleep. Rick decides to drop off Paige and then come back and continue with their hanky-panky. Rick has an awkward encounter with Paige before she alights the car. Paige is a college student. She asks Rick to buy her some beer since she will be of legal drinking age in a week. Paige tries to persuade Rick and even invites him to join her at the river to enjoy some beers. Rick's imagination of the consequences gets the best of him and he refuses to accept Paige's invitation. Rick gets home excited to get things going since Maggie is still awake. They head into their bedroom and find their daughter, who is also unable to sleep. Rick takes her to sleep and reads her a bedtime story. He comes back to his room hoping to continue what has barely started, but Maggie is already asleep. Unknown to him, Maggie is pretending to be asleep to avoid the action. Rick and Fred meet up for some boys' time. Fred confides in Rick about his frequent Palm Sunday celebrations in the parking lot on most nights. Fred finds it hard to believe that he still does this as a married man. They decide to visit a coffee shop to catch a break. Rick is stunned by the foreign barista at the counter by the name Lay. Their gawk fest is cut short by Brent, another employee who tells them off. To make it worse, they run into their friend, Ed, who demonizes them for admiring Lay. Ed is eager to have them at his housewarming party, and he makes it clear that Maggie and Grace have already confirmed their attendance. Rick hosts Fred and their friends at his house for game night. Rick is proud to tell Maggie about his successful daddy duties. Maggie goes to check on the baby and realizes that Rick has been using the wrong baby monitor. As she rocks the baby to sleep, she overhears Gary asking the boys how much they would spend on an erotic weekend with some exotic girls. Fred quotes an outrageous amount. They pester Rick to state his price. Rick is a bit skeptical, but he decides he would sell the house to get his weekend of pleasure. Maggie's upset by the revelation. She meets up with Grace and Lucy during their run to tell them about the boys' game night. Lucy listens in on Maggie and Grace's woes. Maggie wonders if it would be better if the boys just cheated and got the curiosity out of their system. Lucy suggests that they both give their husbands a hall pass. A hall pass is a week off from marriage to allow for a partner to do whatever they want with no consequences. Naturally, Grace and Maggie are against the idea. Grace and Maggie drag the husbands to Ed's housewarming party. Ed lives a grand lifestyle, and it excites him to brag about his ultra-modern home. Rick and Fred make snide comments under their breath as they take the house tour. They get carried away with their banter and end up staying behind in one of the rooms. The rest of the squad continues on the house until the security room. As Ed and his wife are showing their guests how the CCTV works, they notice Rick and Fred in another room. Rick and Fred make fun of Ed, his wife, and their home. To make it worse, Rick and Fred continue making lewd comments about their sexual explorations. Ed kicks them out of the party along with Grace and Maggie. The ride back home is tense. Grace accuses the lads of being obsessed with sex. Rick and Maggie talk. Maggie is offended that Rick gawks at every woman he sees. She makes up her mind to give Rick the hall pass. Rick confides in Fred about the hall pass the next day. Although he's unsure, Fred couldn't be happier and encourages Rick to live his dream. Back at Fred's home, Grace is trying to understand Maggie's situation. Fred attempts some reverse psychology to get his hall pass, but Grace does not fall for its trap. Fred uses the guise of taking out the trash to go shake hands with the milkman in his car. He does not notice the 2 police officers on the street who arrest him thereafter. Grace is pushed to a corner and she decides to give Fred a hall pass. With Grace and Maggie out of town and the picture, Fred and Rick get to planning their escapades. Rick decides to pay for a hotel room for the week since his house is littered with evidence of his marriage and family. Rick and the gang are excited about their newfound freedom. They decide to have some dinner before hitting the bar to meet some babes. Their first night goes to waste after they all end up eating too much and calling it a night. Okay guys, quick pause to remind you to comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. On with the recap. Day 2 of the escapades finds Rick and the boys enjoying some golf and amenities at the resort. Gary decided to unleash brownies that are laced with devil's lettuce for the gang to indulge in. Rick is against the idea, but the rest manage to persuade him. Their mind trip is one for the books. Gary is in the golf course pond where he throws his phone. Hoghead decides to take a dump in the middle of the field, prompting the golf course marshal to chase them off the field. Their day is crowned with an awkward run-in with Ed and his wife, Brittany. The third day approaches with no luck. Meanwhile, Grace and Maggie are having the time of their lives on their trip. They're approached by a baseball player named Jerry who has his eyes on Grace. Their coach, Rick, extends an invitation to them for a pool party later in the day. Maggie is doubtful, but Grace can encourage her to change her mind. Back at home, Rick and Fred are trying to plan their night as they have dinner with their friends. However, the rest of the squad is bored and they call it a night. Rick nearly gives up, but Fred is determined to see the night through. After getting rejected and kicked out of an overpriced club, Rick and Fred decide to try another one. Fred has a helmet and a gimmick because he believes ladies love motorcycles. Fred and Rick have been out of the game for a hot minute. Their cheesy pickup lines fail to impress any lady. They both decide to drink themselves silly instead to get their mojo going. Rick ends up blacking out as Fred is ranting at some woman in his drunken state. Fred's Dutch courage prompts him to pick a fight with someone who is twice his size and height. One punch to the face knocks him out. Rick and Fred spend the next day sleeping and recovering from the hangover. As Maggie and Grace enjoy their getaway, Rick and Fred are struggling with vibing some honey. Rick decides to go back to the coffee shop and try his shot with Leigh. He runs into Brent, who is overprotective towards Leigh. Rick gives him a piece of his mind, and Leigh happens to hear the heated exchange. Leigh decides to invite Rick to her gym so they can grab a drink after their workout. On another side of town, Fred decides to go for a Korean massage, hoping to blow off some steam. Rick makes it to the gym and meets up with Leigh before her session. Rick heads to the jacuzzi instead to read a newspaper, but he ends up falling asleep and missing his date with Leigh. Rick and Fred are at their wits' end. They're about to give up on their hall pass privilege when Fred receives a call from their friend Coakley. Coakley is a man on a mission, ready to hang and bang. Rick and Fred are motivated again, and they meet up with Coakley for a night out. Coakley helps them get their groove back. He persuades Fred to approach one girl. Rick runs into Leigh. Leigh's in the same club supporting Brent, who is the DJ of the night. Paige is also at the same club with her aunt. She admits to Rick that she's been trying to hit on him. The night seems to be going well for Rick more than Fred. Meanwhile, Grace goes to see Jerry in his room and return his gift to her. The tension between them is irresistible and they end up indulging in some horizontal tango. Meg, Paige's aunt, goes up to Rick and Fred's room. She finds Fred, who lies that he's Rick. This works in Fred's favor and Meg ends up popping her cherry for him. Rick and Leigh end up at Coakley's house to continue the party. Rick explains his hall pass situation to Leigh. Leigh is excited to help him through it, but Rick has a last-minute change of heart. He decides to head back to his hotel. Brent drives after him to seek revenge because of Leigh. Grace is emotional and guilty about sleeping with Jerry. The distraction causes her to get into an accident. Brent follows Rick to his hotel room. They find Fred with Meg. Rick has received the news of Grace's accident and he leaves the house with Fred. Just as they're about to leave, they find Brent spray painting Fred's car. To make matters worse, they find out Meg is Brent's mother. Brent is hell-bent on seeking revenge and he gets into a shootout. A series of unfortunate events unfold. Rick and Fred think they have escaped Brent, who is hanging on the car rooftop. Fred is driving at a high speed trying to get to the hospital. They get chased on the road by traffic cops, but Fred decides to step on the gas instead of pulling over. Rick and Fred make it to the hospital in time. Fred is relieved to learn that Grace is okay to be discharged. Maggie realizes that the hall pass was more for her than Rick. They both decide to actively work on making their marriage better. Fred and Grace also reach an understanding never to talk about the events of the hall pass week. What do you think about this one? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.